Here's your raw data. 54% was the average, which is a 30 out of 55. There's your raw data, because they're all the big numbers that you always want to know straight away. Here's the concern from my perspective, the third column. This is based on what the HSC is in reality. 75% is average for every one of your courses. 50% is the cut-off mark between Band 1 and Band 2. So 50% is Band 2, 49% is Band 1.
So how can 18% be 50%?
It's ballpark. No, it's not. HSC exam, the minimum that they usually give is 50%.
Oh, so that's not saying...
This is not related to these marks at all. So task 1 marks compared to HSC.
So you're not saying that 54% is equal to that 75?
No, I'm saying 54% is equal to 30 out of 55. And what we're targeting is 75% average in the HSC. So this column here is just on the task you've just completed. This column is purely based on what the HSC is in reality. All good? Okay. So what we're saying in this general sense, at the moment, we're about 25% below where we should be.
The average? Or
The average.
Is that alright or not?
No, it's not good.
Where are we meant to be at that?
You're meant to be at 75%.
Come on, Aaron.
For the HSC, for us to score in line with the rest of the state, we need an average of about 75%. So right now, we're about 25% below state average. It's not good. The last HSC course that I had was 11% above state average when they finished. Now, reality is that we will build as we get closer to the HSC. Marks will go up, not because we're doing things in class any differently, but because you study more. You start doing more and more work as the realisation that this is the HSC kicks in. So, I'm not happy, but I know that it will improve. Minimum of 18% is not great by any stretch of the imagination, but nor is a maximum of 87%. Band 5 top isn't good. My greater concern is that between the top mark and the second top mark was daylight. There was a really significant gap between the top mark and the second mark. And in fact, the second mark was a tie. So there's two people with the same second mark. My concern about that is that there's clearly one person in the room, and I'm going to make a point of not naming names. And I've also scanned some sample responses from the top, the middle and the bottom, just to give you a bit of a sense of what they look like. I've taken the names off those. I've cut the names out so that it's depersonalised. I'd prefer that if your script appears on the screen, don't say, oh, that's mine. I'd prefer it to remain anonymous. So my concern is the gap between top mark and second top mark. A second concern is the minimum. That should be up near 50%. Just basing it on raw probability. If you've got a multiple choice of 20 and you went all A's, you should get 5 out of 20 statistically. If you just went nothing but A. So for us to be scoring some pretty low marks in multiple choice is a real concern. Multiple choice then. Take a look at your mark, see where it fits into the brackets. If you wanted to achieve a band 6, you needed to score 18 out of 20 in multiple choice. If your target's a band 5, you must have scored 16 or greater in multiple choice. Work out where you scored in terms of multiple choice. For most people, about band 3. And it's not good. A maximum of 65%, a minimum of 20%, and an average of 48% isn't good. An average that's band 1 isn't good. Especially when you've got a 1 in 4 chance of getting it right. So that says to me that your exam technique in terms of multiple choice isn't up to scratch. And when I looked at your papers, There wasn't too many people who sat there with a pen, because you're allowed about a minute per multiple choice question. So I'm guessing that most people didn't read the question more than once, in most cases, and very few people crossed out the wrong answer on their exam paper. And that's a very real exam technique. Read the question, read the possible answers, go back, reread the question, and then cross out the ones that you know are wrong. And if you, on every question, can knock out one or two absolutely wrong responses, all of a sudden you're changing your probability from a 1 in 4 chance to a 1 in 2 chance. If you had a 1 in 2 chance for every question, surely the average would be higher than 48%, because surely you know some answers. So in terms of exam technique, we've got some work to do. Because this course has a really significant multiple choice section in the HSC, 20 multiple choice, we can't afford to be losing marks in that area. Issues, questions, problems? Question 21. What I've got here is the question, the results, and some sample answers. And I've done that for each of the questions. The sheet that I gave out to you first is sample responses. Realistically, the ones that I've scanned are pretty good, although not full marks usually. So running through them, identify each of the 7 information processes. Maximum was 100, minimum was 33%, in other words 1 out of 3, and the average was 95%. So I think there was only 1 or 2 people that didn't score full marks there. If you don't know that yet, we've got some real challenges. Question 22. So we've got a scenario, and this is really common in IPT HSC questions. You get a lot of scenarios, and what you've got to be able to do is read through the scenario and identify the key elements. It scared me that very few people underlined anything in this question. Very few people took a highlighter to it. You've got to do that. Again, if we're talking exam technique, you need to identify in the question, particularly when it's this long, the scenario, what are the key bits? Draw circles around stuff, draw a line out to the side and summarise it. But clarify, in your mind, what's the question asking? So let's read through the scenario together. A factory employs approximately 50 workers. That's nice, has no impact on the question. There is also an attached office where the payroll officer has a computer attached to the company's local area network. Great, so we know there's a person who's in payroll. She has a secretary in the adjoining office who enters each employee's hours into the payroll system each day. That's probably important. So every day we've got data entry happening. What information process is happening? Every day there. Collecting's happening. What other information process is happening every day?
All of them.
Yeah, all of them, but there's ones that are more clear.
Collecting and processing.
Yeah, I'd argue processing not yet.
Displaying.
Not so much yet, more storage and retrieval. Because what's happening every day is there's collecting and it's being stored to the network. So she's entering that Johnny did 3 hours work today, Jane did 6. That has to be stored each day. It's not until the end of the week when it gets processed that that raw data becomes information. Jane worked 23 hours this week. Johnny worked 20. So that processing happens later in the week. At this stage, all we've got is collecting and the data entry, which is storage and retrieval. On Thursday mornings, the payroll officer calculates the gross pay, the tax, and the net pay. So gross pay is the total amount you get. Your tax is based on what the tax office says you've got to pay, and the net pay is that minus that for each employee. She then generates pay slips for each employee, together with a summary page for the factory manager. The manager signs the bottom of the summary before the transfer of money is permitted. Given that the summary sheet is approved, so once the manager has done that, the payroll officer then checks for sufficient funds in the company accounts. So in our business account, have we got the $30,000 we need to pay people this week? She transfers them electronically to each individual's account, which implies that the company has to contain and retain everyone's pay details. So their bank account number, the bank account name, a thing we call the BSB, which is a unique number for each branch of each bank, and generates a check for the tax office. She then distributes the pay slips and posts the tax check to the office. There's your scenario. And in every HSC exam, you will get those style of scenarios. Guarantee it. What they then ask you to do is interpret that scenario and apply the content to it. So this course is not just simply a case of remembering the stuff, it's a case of being able to apply it. Question 1 worth 3 marks was remember it. Kaus patero. This question worth 9 marks is apply kaus patero, along with the information systems in context diagram. Now I said to you on the day of the exam, I'm not that fussed if you do it in a table form or otherwise. If you do it in the diagram, that's fine. If you do it outside the diagram, it's fine, so long as the information's there. Maximum marks, someone scored 100%. Minimum marks, someone scored 0. I said to you before, I write assessment tasks to get people spread out. And I told you why. The average was 60. So we're talking about average of being 6 out of 9, something like that. 5 or 6 out of 9. That's one sample response. As I said, I don't want people's names mentioned when I'm pulling up sample responses. If that's going, get rid of it. This response shows me clearly what happens. It's a really good summary of the process that happens, but it doesn't use. Here's another example. This guy scored 5 out of 9. Not a full mark response. And it's a shocker in terms of trying to find the answers in here. Layout's important. You don't want to make the marker's life harder than what it need be. If the marker's got a hunt to give you marks, you're going to score less marks than if you make it really easy for them to give you marks. So your aim here, and you've got to think towards your HSC examiner, who's gone through a shocking day. They've had 5 periods, they've had Year 9 religion, last period on a Friday, and they've just arrived through Friday afternoon traffic at the marking centre. They're in trouble because they've arrived 3 minutes late, and the head examiner's sitting there going, you know, you're late, what's going on? They sit down, really hot day in November, and they pick up your paper. That's the person you've got to write to. That's the person who you've got to format your exam responses for. Someone who's really not in the mood for it, someone who's tired, cranky, grumpy, hot, got a shocking parking spot, and has now got to sit down and do 5 hours worth of marking, which I really don't feel like doing. That headspace is the person you've got to present for. So if you present it in a format like this where you've got to work hard to find the marks, you're less likely to get the marks. So I'm not talking about content now, I'm just simply talking about exam format and response format. Interestingly enough, some of the things that were challenges here, IT was one that a lot of people struggled with. I've said to you time and time again, IT requires hardware, software, communications. If you don't deal with all 3, you don't get the marks. HSC doesn't give out half marks. You've got it or you haven't got it. Nowhere in between. The rest of the response isn't too bad. As I said, formatting was an issue. In terms of reading the marks that I've put on your page, a tick means good. A cross means bad. 3 dots means I need more information. Or a line means I need more information. And nothing means it's neither good or bad. It's not that I didn't read it, it's just that it's okay. So tick for good, cross for bad, nothing for okay. 3 dots for I need more information, or a line suggesting I need more information. So that's the way to interpret my marking.
What's a question mark, sir?
Question mark means I don't understand what you mean. I don't get it. What you've written doesn't make sense to me. Question 23 then. Making withdrawal from an ATM. Like this one should have been fairly easy, and a bunch of people said, I don't get it. And that's okay, because you haven't run into HSC style questions yet. Here's your opportunity to learn how to read them. Making a withdrawal from an ATM involves each of the 7 information processes. That's not the question. That's the scenario. It's a statement. It's stimulus material, not the question. You need to answer the question. Part A. Identify in sequence each action that the ATM must perform in order to complete the transaction. It's not asking for the information processes. It's asking you to identify in sequence what you do, or what the ATM does, when you go to the ATM to get money out. Anyone on the street can answer this question and get 6 out of 6. A Year 7 student who knows how to use an ATM can answer this question. And you get these sorts of questions in the HSC, which is really exciting. The problem is your headspace has got to work out exactly what the question's asking. So the word identify simply means name it, list it. It doesn't mean go into detail. It means identify. Name it or list it. Often you don't get very many marks for identify type questions. This one's probably generous, if anything. So the things that you'd expect to see in that part of the question would be insert card, verify the card and the PIN number, receive or collect the withdrawal amount, check to see if the withdrawal amount is available in the bank account, dispense card, receipt, money, subtract the amount of money from the person's balance in the account. That's the sort of sequence that I'd be expecting to see there. That's quite different to part 2. So if part 1 was, receive the card and the PIN number, part 2 is saying, well, part B in the question is saying classify that step as one of the information processes. So if you're collecting the card and the PIN number, it's clearly collecting. So you would have simply said step 1 in part A was collecting. When you're checking to see if there's enough money in the account, it's transmitting and receiving. When you're returning the card, printing out a receipt and giving the cash out, it's displaying.
Do you have to write it in order?
If this question in part A said identify and sequence, you would have said step 1 do this, step 2 do this, step 3 do this. In part B, the sensible and easiest thing to do is go, step 1 is collecting, step 2 is...
So it doesn't have to then go organising?
No, not at all. Not at all. And it won't fall in that sequence. So if verifying the PIN number is the second step, then transmitting and receiving is number 2. So the challenge here is to read the question and understand what it is that the examiner is asking for. Again, maximum of 100%, so someone got full marks. Someone got nothing, but the average was only 37%. That's not great when you're talking a total of 12 marks available. We'll talk as to why in a minute. There's a sample of part A, just to give you an idea. That was worth about 4. There's someone who got full marks, and you can see how they've gone, step 1 was collecting and analysing. And I'll put this on Hive so you can see it and you can walk your way through it. There's a sample of part A, just to give you an idea. That was worth about 4. There's someone who got full marks, and you can see how they've gone, step 1 was collecting and analysing. And I'll put this on Hive so you can see it and you can walk your way through it. I'm going to take like 2 more minutes just to finish off here, and then you'll be late to next period. That's unlucky for them. Last one. Identify 3 social and ethical issues that might apply to creating a end-of-year school annual. And then 4 things that you can do that will help rectify them. I'd prefer you didn't pack up while I'm talking about. Again, 100%, 0%. I've made my point that my intention is to spread people out. Average of 63% in this question. It was as simple as writing down 3 things to identify and get full marks. Then listing out a bunch of stuff. This guy got 6 marks because I didn't understand what that one was. But they scored 2 marks for each of the others. It was worth 12 marks in total. Was it? No, 9 marks in total. No, 11 marks in total. Alright, here's the final bit of feedback then. And this is the bit that I really want you to knuckle down and understand. You need to answer the questions being asked. Don't try and assume what the examiner wants. Answer the question. We saw that particularly with that ATM one. Only provide enough content to score full marks. Some people wrote, I'd prefer you didn't pack up. Some people wrote like 2 or 3 pages, no, that's an exaggeration, a page and a bit for part A of question 21. It's worth 3 marks. They could have written 3 dot points and scored the same number of marks. The reason I make this point is that you're wasting your time if you write a full page to score 3 marks when you can do 3 dot points to score 3 marks. So read how many marks the question's worth and provide enough content to get that many marks, but no more. You need to answer the question explicitly, and some people, particularly in those parts where there's part A and part B, combine them together. That's a bit like in maths, getting what's 1 plus 1 and 1 plus 2, going, okay, well that's 2 and that's 3, I'm going to tell you the answer's 5, rather than saying the answer's 2 and 3. You can't combine answers together. You wouldn't do it in maths, don't do it here. And the impression I get overall is you haven't done enough study. We've spoken about that. There's your rank order. Here's your new seating positions. Tim, Ethan, next period, sit together. No arguments around it. Don't care where in the room. The person who scored the higher marks get to choose whereabouts in the room. Luke, Ross, Jack, Paul, Matt, Sean, Anthony, Peter, James, Chris, Aaron, Danny. You'll enjoy each other's company, no doubt. Person who scored higher marks gets to choose where in the room they sit. Other person must sit next to them. No arguments, no questions. Tim scored top.